Hello everyone, so today is a bit of a different video from what I usually do because I'm going to do a reaction video, and for this video I will react to Ollie Richards' video which is called Don't Learn Grammar Before You Really Need It, and it's part of a series he does about the rules of language learning. Troll. I know what you did there. And I thought it would be interesting to react to this video because it's about grammar, and I usually have quite a lot to say about grammar, and I didn't really talk about it on my channel, so I thought it would be interesting to sort of give you my point of view or like my take on grammar by basing myself on someone that did a video on grammar. So in this video it's not going to be about saying you're wrong, I'm right or anything. It's just going to be about sort of discussing points, because what I like the most about linguistics is the fact that nothing is sort of black and white. You can always sort of argue things, and that's sort of why I find it fun. So let's get started. So I might skip some bits because I don't want the video to be too long, and also sorry for the lighting. There's my window over there, so there might be some slight changes in luminosity. So anyway, let's get started.
Good morning everybody, and welcome back to the Rules of Language Learning. My name is Ollie Richards. Now I want you to imagine that you want to learn to play a new musical instrument, the piano, say. So you find a piano teacher and you head off to your first lesson. Your teacher introduces herself and spends the next hour talking passionately about the history of the piano and how it developed over the years. But you don't play a single note during that lesson. So you come back again the next week, and in this lesson things get really exciting. The teacher shows you inside the piano. She lifts up the lid and shows you everything that's going on inside. The strings, how the hammers hit the strings, how the keys are attached to the hammers, but still no playing. Lesson 4. Things get really exciting. You actually sit down at the piano. The teacher lifts the lid of the keyboard. And then she says, before we start playing, you need to learn some theory.
Okay, I don't know how your piano lessons work, but I did do piano lessons for a very short amount of time, and from day one you play the piano. So anyway, I don't know where it's going to go with this.
Why exactly is it so bad to learn all this theory first without playing the piano itself? After all, this stuff is important, isn't it? You do need to learn the theory. Well, there's two reasons. Firstly, a lot of stuff is best learned by doing. Not everything is best learned theoretically. Sometimes the best way to learn something is to roll up your sleeves and work it out by yourself. And the things that you learn from experience are infinitely more powerful than learning those same things from the pages of a book. Point is, your teacher didn't need to spend months lecturing you about music theory, because you could have worked out a good chunk of that by yourself just by sitting down and playing and having the experience of music. Now here's the second reason, and this is a bit more subtle. At any point in your learning journey, there are certain things that you're ready to learn and things that you're not ready to learn yet. Things that you're ready to learn typically lie just outside your current sphere of knowledge.
So far we agree. So far I agree, yeah.
I've given a name for this concept in learning theory, and it's called the zone of proximal development. It's the idea that things are learnable as long as they fall within this special zone which is just beyond your current level of knowledge. Now, if on the other hand you try to learn too much too soon, you're unlikely to learn it because you're just not ready for it yet.
This is very interesting, this bit. It's something when I was doing my PGC, which is a teaching degree, we learned about something similar. I don't know if it's a synonym or something, but it's called scaffolding. And scaffolding is the idea that you kind of build up your knowledge. So you start with, whatever point you are at, and then you kind of build it up. So it's like scaffoldings. And I believe this is something that, this is something he's trying to, that he's talking about. And it's actually something very important that we learn as teachers, and it might be taught in different ways, but essentially something we are sort of encouraged to apply, because, and I agree with it, I think it's the best way to do things. If you do something that is too difficult, then you're not going to learn as effectively as if you learn something which is just a little bit more difficult but still has a lot of things that you already know. And I think this is definitely important in terms of language learning, and especially for grammar, I suppose.
The stuff that you're not ready to learn yet is most stuff. Most stuff you're just not ready for yet. Right? There's no point teaching me how I can use the pedals of the piano to change the sound quality of the notes before I've even learned to control my fingers on the keyboard yet. When it comes to language learning, there is a big blind spot around this issue, in particular when it comes to grammar. Now, if you walk into any language classroom around the world, and I've walked into a few, let me tell you that, I would put money on what is being taught at that exact moment that you walk in.
This is not always true. I mean, I'm not saying, I can only talk about my experience, and I'm a teacher, so I do teach in classrooms, and I've attended classes, and it's not always the case. Personally, as a teacher, I think I do almost no grammar on the first lesson, and I do grammar that I feel is useful. So for example, in the first lesson, we'll learn basic phrases, because I think the most important thing, especially for first lesson, is to feel like you are able to say something, and I think that's quite powerful to be able to make sure that students, after a lesson, they're able to say something. It doesn't have to be, they're not fluent after an hour and a half of a lesson, but at least they're able to say some things. And then gradually I start doing grammar. So for French, I will do articles, definite, indefinite. And then you do it gradually. So I don't really agree that, grammar is the first thing you learn in a classroom. Having said that, it is true that, like, let's say 10, 15 years ago, I don't have the timeline specifically, but I know when I was younger, grammar was a big thing. The reason is that French is such a difficult language to speak or even write, that if you don't have grammar, then it's impossible to write proper French. And I think that might explain why in France we are so big on grammar, because it's so important for us to learn grammar and to understand grammar, to be able to apply it and write properly and speak French properly as well. And I think in language learning there was for a long time some sort of language teaching movement where grammar was very important, and it was usually taught first, and then you apply it, and then now it tends to be the other way around. So teachers usually should introduce some language where the grammar is used without making it explicit how the grammar works, and then after students have kind of seen this particular concept in context, then you talk about the grammar. That's ideally how modern teaching works.
Can it really be that all that grammar is so important that it needs to be learned at exactly that time, before everything else? Well, perhaps. But here's the thing. Novice language learners all tend to think that grammar is far more important than it actually is. How can I start speaking before I know the grammar? See, I've lost count of the number of times that I've heard people say this. I haven't learned the present perfect and the future conditional and the I don't know what yet, so I'll just concentrate on that for a while, learn that, and I'll start speaking later.
Well, I'm guessing he sort of exaggerated to make his point, but I agree with you, with him. A lot of people feel like that about grammar, and I think it's very interesting because for a long time I thought grammar was important because obviously I was biased by French. Sorry, I know I'm like a ghost now, it's very bright. But yeah, so in France, we don't actually believe you can speak without grammar or communicate without grammar. And I kind of learned that during my master's in linguistics, where you actually realize that grammar is not always that useful. I could say something like, you get book me, and then you will still understand my sentence. So that sort of shows that grammar is actually sort of optional. I mean, it's better because obviously you communicate more easily, and what you say is clearer. But you don't always need grammar to express yourself and communicate. And it's actually something that for a lot of people is hard to understand or to kind of accept.
The best time to learn a particular grammar point, you see, is not when it comes up in your textbook. The absolute best, most helpful, most awesome time to learn a bit of grammar is when you've just been into a cafe and you tried to order something using a phrase you've learned, but something wasn't quite right and the guy understood you, but the message didn't get across quite right and you thought it was right, but it wasn't quite, and something wasn't completely clear. The reason why is because you were missing a helpful bit of grammar.
I just want to comment on something. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way or the order in which books teach grammar. I mean, it is arbitrary to some extent, but it does make sense. Because, you usually start with the present tense, then you start with more like a functional language and, that kind of stuff. But I don't agree that, you should mistrust or distrust or whatever the word is, the books, because I think it actually makes sense, and often students, I will teach them a grammar bit and I will show you in lots of context how it's applicable. And I think it's very important to emphasize on that. Whenever I teach grammar to my students, I don't just follow the book. I mean, I do follow the book, but if I think something is not important, then I will spend much less time on it. But usually I make sure that whatever I teach them makes sense. I will tell them, you know, oh, this will be useful because you will be able to use that in that context, and this you'll be able to use in another context. And it's important that whatever you teach them feels like it's useful. And I'm not saying you should manipulate them into thinking it's useful, but it actually has to be useful. Because otherwise, what is the point of teaching it and learning it?
But the relentless focus on grammar that you see in virtually every language curriculum, it does something poisonous. It instills in students the belief that they can't start speaking or using the language yet until they've learnt all the grammar.
I don't agree with this. Essentially, what we do in my lesson is that whenever I teach something, I always make sure we can do some sort of dialogue and they can already start to communicate. So I don't believe that there's this idea that you need grammar to be able to speak, especially in my setting where I do, you know, evening teaching, which is aimed for adults. Usually people want to learn, and because I don't even have exams at the end of the year, then there's no reason for me not to do speaking. So I do speaking. Having said that, it is true that books might do one thing, which is that you need to speak accurate grammar, and I agree with that. Because, you know, us as the teacher, I will always teach them the perfect language, or, you know, as perfect as possible. Even though, because I'm a trained linguist, I kind of try to always tell them, you know, I tell you the perfect way of doing things, but, you know, it's okay if you mispronounce things. It's okay if you kind of forget one word, if you don't conjugate the verb in the right form. It's okay, you know, it's not the end of the world. So I try not to encourage, you know, perfection, because I don't think it's actually helpful. And what's important is for them to be able to use the language and have fun with it, you know, and being able to, you know, communicate. That's, I think, you know, a victory. And it's just, you know, what they're here for.
Can you imagine applying that logic to the piano? I'm only going to start playing the piano once I've mastered music theory. You'd never get anywhere, you'd give up before you started. We need a completely different approach to teaching grammar that is smarter than simply presenting a humongous list of rules and tenses and things that have to be learned. In my Grammar Hero program, for example, my way to help you learn grammar naturally is to show you that grammar in the context of stories, fun stories, so that you get to see that grammar in action and learn it naturally from within stories, not through rules.
But and I think what he's talking about, I mean, I don't know his program particularly, but it's essentially what you know, modern teaching is like. Is, as I said at the beginning of the video, is to first show you the language and then teach it. And maybe Ollie, and that would be fair enough, I'm kind of the same, maybe he's influenced by the way he was taught languages, or maybe in some context. Obviously, I don't know, I'm just guessing here. But I'm guessing he's referring to the old-fashioned way of teaching languages, which you know, it's starting to be different. I don't know how it is all over the world, but I know in England people don't really teach that way. It's kind of seen as old-fashioned and, you know, not very, you know, good practice essentially. But I kind of have an issue with the word naturally, because naturally sort of implies, you know, learning like children, because, you know, adults, we don't learn the language naturally. I mean, we can, but what I'm trying to say is, like, you know, if you're self-teaching or, you know, just going to a classroom, it's not going to be natural. And for me, natural would be to, you know, for example, my dad, he learned French naturally because he came to France when he was 25, and then he learned to speak it, and to some extent write it sort of naturally, you know, by speaking and learning on the go. So he didn't have any formal lessons. But to me, that would be natural. But otherwise, I think as soon as you're starting to study, I don't know how it can be natural. I'm not saying it's not, but I just don't see it. I kind of have an issue maybe with the term. But again, you know, I might be a linguist. I don't know everything, and you know, yeah, that's all I can say really.
Waiting to speak until you've learned more grammar is going to put you on this eternal hamster wheel. So the solution? Well, it's quite simple. Do yourself a favour, put the textbooks away, get out there and speak, and don't learn grammar before you really, really need it.
So thank you, Ollie, for this video. So to sort of conclude, I just would like to say that the video was interesting. I did agree with many points that you made, but just something I kind of don't like, and it's not just Ollie, but it's not a big thing, but to me, I don't like it when people say, don't do this or do this in language learning. Sometimes it makes sense, and, you know, I will agree, but just because I agree with something, I don't like kind of telling people what to do. For example, I know that I love learning grammar, like, and it doesn't keep me from speaking. I just love, you know, understanding the grammar and getting to know the grammar of a language, because I don't know, that's just what I like the most in the language. So I think I agree. Like, don't focus on the grammar and then wait, you know, to learn enough grammar, however amount of grammar that might be, before you speak, because definitely that will just slow you down. But on the other hand, I think if grammar is, you know, your cup of tea, then learn as much grammar as you want. But yeah, I think what he's trying to say though is that, you know, people will just wait forever before they speak a language because they just want to learn the grammar and focus on the grammar. And it would be a bad thing, but according to me. But for someone else, if that's what they want to be, then sure, I guess, you know, do whatever you like. No one's going to tell you what to do, really. But I would argue something else, which is you don't necessarily need to wait to need the grammar to learn it. I think sometimes it's okay, depends on the grammar point. If it's like things like tenses, I think it's okay for you to learn them beforehand. If it's something like, I don't know, adjectives, conjugation, in French anyway, that will be useful. Not adjective conjugation, adjective agreement, sorry. It will be important to know in advance, but I agree, you know, if you're going for the details like the relative clauses or like, you know, nailing every preposition after a verb, then yes, I don't think it's very useful. And I think in that case, even, like I will teach it to my students sometimes, but I tell them often, you know, you can know the grammar but still find it difficult, and often it's just the exposure that kind of gets you to you know, being comfortable with that grammar aspect. So I do agree with him, you know, if you have the opportunity, you know, go out and speak, but I wouldn't be so harsh against grammar. I think I would be more sort of less extreme as Ollie, if I may say. He's not extreme, but you know, I would be less that anyway. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like me to react to more videos, let me know. I don't know if people will like that kind of video. And I will see you next week. Bye. But I would argue something else, which is you don't necessarily need to wait to need the grammar to learn it. I think sometimes it's okay, depends on the grammar point.